We were talking about this earlier, that in the digital age, we can talk about the digital divide. But under the intelligent age, it's really a dignity divide of deciding who gets to progress and who gets to be left behind. And you have a book called The New World Disorder. But let's talk about the disorders that took place in the analog age, digital age, and how could we avoid it in the intelligent age. In the analog age, we have $110 trillion today worth of GDP. Per capita, for every dollar being made in the global south, somebody makes 3.5 to 4x that in the global north. That's not acceptable. And it's not a surprise that it's going to cost humanity $6 trillion to close down the gender divide, climate change, and all of the problems. In the digital age, 2.6 billion people left behind in the digital age. 100 million in the global north, 2.5-ish in the global south. Again, for every dollar being captured from that $16 trillion today digital economy, 3.5 to 5x being made. Let's talk about the new AI order. What's happening? You're talking about a projection, whether you're a realist or an optimist, 700 million people to a billion people. That's an exclusive club of a billion people who have access to compute, algorithms, and data. That means if this room represents the world, you're talking in every row, if you have 10 people, 1 to lead and 9 to be left behind. That's not acceptable. And that's why we need a new governance model in partnership with the kingdom and like-minded nations that we have here and parties and thought leaders to make sure that we deliver a comprehensive governance model that is inclusive, innovative, and impactful. I cannot stress on this enough. And let me draw another parallel for you. If you deprive a person of oxygen for 3 minutes, you will cause irreversible damage. If you dehydrate them of water for 3 days, you will cause irreversible damage. Same thing for foods within 3 weeks. If you take out compute and you restrict it, algorithms, frontier, large models, small models, and you restrict them, and data flows, at one point you will cause irreversible damage to economies and to societies. This is why this is an existential conversation in 2025 as we transition into the intelligent age. So we used to have 3 divides: a talent divide, a digital divide, and a governance divide. Those were carried over in the intelligent age with 3 new divides because of the scaling law. The more compute, the less noisy, the more powerful the model is. The more data, the more parameters, same thing. So we have a compute divide, a data divide, and an algorithmic divide. What are we doing? We're partnering with France, with IBM, with Mistral, with global players to make sure that as the world today needs 63 gigawatts worth of compute power, by the way, that's in the next 5 years as big as what India needs, the most populous country on earth, and as much water, because energy translates into heat, into cooling and water, as much water as the US needs. And hence, the kingdom has a fiduciary duty to say, as the energy leader of the world, that powers up 20% of the energy mix of the world, we're not putting quotas. We're collaborating with everybody. We're putting our resources to make sure that we close down that compute divide. On the algorithmic front, we're collaborating with everybody here to make sure that large models, small models are tackling the most pressing issues in generative AI for sickle cell disease, which I showcased last Davos, for the first heart transplant that is made with full robotics, with physical AI. And in agentic AI, we have one of the real use cases with Mistral and others collaborating of how we could optimize within the circular carbon economy, delivering the lowest carbon footprint and uplift cost for our energy sector, delivering a true use case for how agentic AI can deliver prosperity for the people and the planet.
It's very critical that we take a step back and look at the fundamentals. This is a classic example of challenges of perception versus perspective. We talk about governance, but let's go to the building blocks of what is governance. It goes back to the steam engine. There's a component called the governor. It controls flow of resources to make sure that there's no cap on energy, there's no cap on the steam engine, there's no cap on anybody, and it creates that balance to make sure it's inclusive, innovative, impactful to help humanity, if you look at the industrial revolutions. Although as the heart of the Arab and the Muslim world, we would argue that the governor component came 563 years before that from al-Juzari, from irrigation systems with gears back in the Islamic golden time. Going back to the basics, there are 3 layers: the data layer, the algorithmic layer, and the outcome layer. The data layer, we all agree. We all have data protection acts because consumer privacy is very critical. On the algorithmic layer, we should not stifle innovation. Let's borrow brilliantly from B2B SaaS What's effectively happening in agentic AI is borrowing from the $300 billion of unicorns in B2B SaaS we have seen in the past 20 years. If it's in the context of healthcare, you have to conform to HIPAA. If it's in the context of banking, it's PCI. See that generative AI example that we have showcased last year with sickle cell disease, right? So we cut corners on drug formulation. In 3 years, we were able to cut down a problem statement that normally takes 15 years. But when it comes to critical clinical trials, there's no shortcuts. That 15 patients a day that are receiving that drug are going for stage 1 for toxicity and stage, and side effects. Stage 2 is efficacy, then full approval. So it has to be a risk-based approach when it comes to the outcomes. We have been very clear and very consistent. If you go back to 2020, the toughest year of COVID, under His Royal Highness the Crown Prince leadership, we drove for the first time consensus and commitment at the G20 level for the OECD principles of trustworthy AI. When you're talking about all of the subsequent regulations, piece of governance forums, they all reference that point in history. Fast forward to today, we have built a coalition of like-minded nations called the Digital Cooperation Organization. 16 countries, the majority in the Global South, and we have made sure that we launched the AI for All initiative, leaving no one behind. See the sickle cell disease problem? We're working right now with nations in the Middle East and Africa tackling these genetic diseases. See the agentic AI that we have delivered for Aramco, this is achieving $1 billion of optimization. We're opening this as an open source to other nations to benefit from them within this industry. We have a showcase tonight within the Aramco reception. You're all invited to see it firsthand. So we have been consistent that in the intelligent age, you can't afford to leave people behind because the cost is as catastrophic of depriving a person of oxygen, water, and food. In a minute, Dr. Samir. You all have heard it from Mistral, IBM, and France and Saudi, how we're collaborating as a coalition of like-minded nations to make sure that this general purpose technology leaves no one behind. Because the cost that we have seen in the analog world and in the digital world, in the intelligence age, is going to be so big and so large. And this is why this is a call to action. And I do invite everybody after the session to collaborate and join hands together of how we can make sure that we close down the 3 new divides, leveraging, for example, the kingdom's captive market, energy and capital on the compute, algorithmic, and data divide to make sure that there's a governance model that is inclusive, impactful, and innovative for all.
Thank you so much for joining us.